Live or listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good morning. Are we live? Yeah, we are. Yeah. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Teachers Talk Radio. So this show is brought to you by Kialo Edu. BET award-winning Edu is the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. Students can instantly and simultaneously create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Over 1 million educators and students are already using this to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialoedu.com. And also, the show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. I mean, it doesn't sound like it, but I'm actually properly awake today, guys. And I think our first topic today is the article in The Guardian that stated permanently excluded pupils are twice as likely to commit crime, essentially. So what are your thoughts on that?
I have many thoughts on that, which is, for a start...
Yeah, go on.
Your thoughts there, right? Okay, for a start, the idea that us permanently excluding them is the reason why they end up in that situation, like the whole, exclusion to prison pipeline. I just think it's a load of nonsense, quite frankly. And I am trying my best to be civil about this because we all know that the problems stem from home. We all know this. We all know that there are multiple issues that need to be dealt with before we even get there, right? So we're just on the receiving end of this. We're not the people causing this. And the idea that we cause this makes our lives difficult because we can't actually help, and it makes the entire system difficult to cope with in the first place. So there are multiple reasons why this is happening, right? For a start, some children will do things that are bad because they choose to do things that are bad. Secondly, there are things that cause exclusions or are at the root cause of exclusion, such as, for example, abuse, such as which does not mean that we should exclude necessarily, but at the same time, we've got to have a limit on this. We can't be the receiving end, and we can't allow other children to be the receiving end. Fatherless homes, for example, they are also correlated with this whole situation. So why is that not the main thing, right? So if you turn around and you say, right, illiteracy, fatherless homes, poor parenting are all correlated, why are they not equally stuck on this measure? Why is it just us who are on the receiving end who are then being told that it's us excluding? Okay, so at some point you've got to exclude. You've got to exclude. I'm sorry, but you do. You can't just keep saying that we should never exclude any child from the classroom ever. You've got to do it because otherwise what you're doing is excluding the other children. You hit a point where that's what you're doing.
But I don't think that's what most people who kind of raise awareness about exclusions are trying to say. I think, two things can be true at once, that, exclusions are necessary for schools in the current system that we have, but also they, pose huge risk for children. And I don't like this fatalistic idea tied to logic.
You tell me, Yasmin, if a child sexually like assaults another child, what do you do in that situation? Because you have to do something.
You exclude. I'm not against exclusions, to be clear, but I just what I don't understand, Tarinder, is why does everything always go to this extreme? Like, I think the article really quite pointed out that most exclusions, I think half of them are for persistent disruption. They're not for a sexual assault of pupils in classrooms. Yeah, I feel like your views here are just really fatalistic. I think to say that. Sorry, right? Can I just finish, Tarinder, please?
Yeah, go.
So I think to say that a child who has been excluded for poor behaviour is more likely to go on to commit a crime anyway, which is a rhetoric I see all the time on Twitter, is really unfair because it completely ignores the fact that children are excluded for many different things. There are also children excluded for one-off incidents. There are children excluded, like, I don't think it's that it's a jump to say a child who was disrupting a lesson should therefore then go. It shouldn't be a surprise that they commit a crime. It should be. And I think what you're ignoring here is actually the reason, which I felt this article actually tried to highlight, the reason why more children they're more likely to commit a crime is because of the vulnerabilities faced when they are excluded and go to a pupil referral unit, and schools wash their hands off of children.
But schools never wash their hands off.
They do. If you're excluded, sorry, what school follows up? What school follows will be like
absolutely awful. When like, I've never met a leader or somebody who's actually had to exclude a child who does not feel less than awful when they've actually had to do it.
Sorry, how they feel isn't really relevant.
But those one-off incidents when so for a start,
sorry guys, I just triggered my story.
Is massive, right? That means every lesson, that means every other child must be excluded all the time from that lesson for that child, right? For that to happen, it's not like it's a one-off thing. People are trying to do their absolute best within mainstream.
Sorry, there are exclusions for one-off things. There are plenty of
while we're talking about the reasons for exclusions, I'm just going to jump in here because
Sure.
Thank you, Yasmin, for bringing in the idea that, yeah, you're right. Persistent disruptive behavior is the number one reason, and it's in just over 50% of exclusion cases. However, the second most common reason, and it's present in just over 20% of exclusion cases, is physical assault against the pupil. Third, threatening behavior against an adult, closely followed and fourth by physical assault against an adult, and then so on and so forth. And there's lots of other serious, very serious cases here. Now, I don't know how much of those were one-offs. Obviously, persistent behavior is persistent and repeating. But I think what Tarinder says is really interesting, this idea that if the persistently disruptive pupil is in that lesson, what are they doing to the education of all the other pupils and to a teacher? If you have, I hope we any of us haven't, but lots and lots of teachers have been physically assaulted by their children, threatened by children. And we say children, often they may be, if you're in secondary school, physically larger, stronger than you. That's very scary. And then what do we do when we say, as a workplace, the work conditions for teachers are such that, okay, you've been threatened by this child or this pupil, whatever, but we still expect you to share the building with them, or maybe even to carry on teaching them. I think if you take exclusions off the table, or you make them such a last resort that they in practice never really happen, you do something quite scary to the working conditions of teachers and what you're asking them to put up with.
Look, I was a union rep for a really long time. I care a lot about the, well-being and safety of teachers. And I'm not denying here that there are children who do really, really bad things in schools. I'm not denying that. For me, I get it. Like, I'm not against a child who's physically assaulted anyone from being excluded from school. That isn't the point for me here. The point is what happens to those children afterwards. There's always a focus on these 29 others, but what about the safety and well-being? Hang on, Tarinder, of this child. It's like children. One second,
right? They're 29 other human beings. You can't just put that in quotations and say that's okay.
I put it in quotations because it's always what's used on Twitter. I'm not saying their safety isn't important. However, there is more of an emphasis on them. And what I'm trying to say is...
I'm sorry. The 29 other human beings have got more emphasis on them than one person, right?
No, that's not the point. No, that's not what I said.
Because they choose
to... Well, if you let me finish. If you let me finish,
I'm not going to let you make this point quite frankly, without me
Well, you're
actually
going to
being
have to,
angry
I'm
about
afraid.
it. Those 29 other children also exist. They are allowed to exist as actual human beings, and they're not any less because one child, no matter what their problems are, presents themselves in that class, right? Those 29 others are real people to us. We have to teach them, Yasmin. You cannot say, put them aside because there's that one person. Sorry, you can't say that.
Okay, well, that's what you said. That's what you said. And what I was going to say was, it's not one or the other, which a lot of people.
No, but it is one or the other.
The point is, Tarinder, I've got a question. Can I just ask you a question? Is the safety and well-being of all 30 children just as equally as important? Or are we going to put them on a sliding scale based on their behavior? That is my question to you.
Sorry, no. We don't put them on a sliding scale.
So which is what you're doing. Which is what you're doing.
We possibly can. But what we cannot do over and over and over again, repeatedly, particularly like you look at a primary classroom, right? You're in that classroom with that child for like 6 years. That's 6 years of your education or 7 years of your education ruined because that one child continuously disrupts your class, right? So what do? Like you don't have the same level of education.
I've already,
first of all, I'm secondary with the same level of education, and you can't just go quote them because they're not worth anything. Because one thing I did remember, no, because I know that you've looked after that one child, and therefore you're like, well, why didn't you look after that one child the same way? What? Because the other 29, and you put it in quotations.
I've already explained, Tarinder, and you haven't answered my question. You haven't answered my question. So if you'll just let me finish, thank you. What I am trying to say to you is the safety of those 29 children is equal to the safety of the one child. And what I won't accept is children being placed on.
It isn't. If that one child is being disruptive,
I can't hear myself.
And if they are threatening the other 29. Sorry, no, it's not the same thing. You cannot continuously say that it's the same thing. Oh, it's just a sliding scale. No, it's not. Because what you're trying to say is, well, if we just keep all 30 safe, everything will be fine. No, it won't be, because there are conditions for that one child that makes them unsafe towards the other 29 in the first place, and we've got to deal with those issues.
And I said I support exclusion, so like I don't understand.
So it seems to me like can I make a distinction that might help us here? So I think we all agree, like most teachers do, that exclusions in some cases are absolutely acceptable. If the child, pupil, whoever has been physically abusive to other children, they're endangering the safety of themselves, whatever, great. Sometimes it has to happen. No one got into this business to do it. Everyone feels terrible when it happens, but it has to happen in some cases. However, Tarinder, you've talked about disruptive behavior a lot, and that's a bit more. I can see how someone like Yasmin can say, oh, okay, but what about disruptive behavior? Because are you getting rid of them because they're endangering other children, or are you getting rid of them because it makes your life easier?
Children. For a start, this idea that we get rid of children is such a nonsense, right? No, we don't. We don't. We don't. We try. No, you don't, because you do your absolute best within class to do everything you can. You do all the reasonable adjustments you can. If you cannot then do that, then something else has to happen. In the end, something else has to happen. You can't just say, oh, well, you got rid of them. Like, as if we don't care about them, as if we don't think about them, as if they've gone out of our heads and they never exist anymore, right? I'm sorry, that's not how it works. That's not what people are doing. People are not sitting in their classrooms going, I'm going to get rid of that child because they're just disrupting my class. It's like, this is disrupting my class on such an endless basis that I've got to say something, I've got to do something. Look, if children disrupt your class, and they will do it all the time because they're children, right? Particularly young children, they don't even know what they're doing half the time, right? They don't understand the consequences of their behavior. So you keep trying to teach them, you keep trying to get them back in, you keep finding ways. And it's only when there's no more ways that you can possibly do that you say, right, fine, you go higher up, you go to other people, you ask them for help, they come and they help you, and they themselves have got to say to you, no, there's no more ways now, right? So therefore it's not like a click of the finger, there you go, get rid of them, right? Because that's the way that it comes across in these articles. That's what we're doing. We just click our fingers, we get rid of children. And when you say get rid, it's not getting rid of them. Like,
okay, look, Tarinder,
we're still trying to help them, because even excluding them may help them better than them staying put in what is your classroom or in your school, because there's nothing more you can do, right? As if we're not trying everything possible. Right? Like, I don't think you understand, Yasmin. People have to try everything possible. They have to show, when you exclude a child from school, you've got to have proven that you've tried everything you possibly can, because they can come back at you and saying that you haven't tried everything possible. Put them back in the class. Go ahead. So this has got to be the most awful thing they've done, or the most, like, it's carried on for so long that you can't cope anymore, and your school can't cope anymore, and your class can't cope anymore. We are not doing what you're saying. Because
no,
like,
look, Tarinder, I genuinely look. I understand what you're saying. I genuinely do. And I do also understand that primary school is very different in that, you know, there are children who do suffer with the same children in their classes for over many, many years. And that can erode a lot, you know, for both teachers and children. I do understand that. And I also totally agree with the fact that these articles, you know, villainize schools and teachers. And, you know, I do think the way these articles come across can be really unfair or, you know, misrepresent schools. However, for me, the focus of this article was about the dangers that children face once they're excluded. Respectfully, I don't think this is about how a head teacher or a member of staff feels when they exclude a child. And when I say that they get rid of them, sorry, Will, 1 second.
Sorry.
That's totally fine. When I say that they get rid of them, I don't really mean, you know, that there are teachers who are sat at home thinking, you know, what am I going to do to ruin this child's life? What I just mean by that, okay, and I will be less dramatic, but what I mean by that is children go to approve. Say, for example, you've had a child who brought a knife into school, or a child who committed a serious assault and was permanently excluded. You've got other children, you know, who are excluded for other things or for one-off incidents. Let's just say I'm focusing on secondary school, and you know, this is based on, you know, I've worked in different schools, I've worked in PRUs, and since I was a teenager, I've also advocated for and represented children in permanent exclusion panels. But, you know, say you've got a child who was watching a fight, and, you know, there's just so many reasons, I'm not going to get into them. And, you know, there are children who are permanently excluded. You've now got children who probably never witnessed any kind of serious violence or crime in mainstream, because of the fact that mainstream are much safer places. And now all of a sudden they're expected to go to a school with every other child in the borough who's you know, met a threshold for permanent exclusion. And that's serious. And, you know, a lot of children, attendance plummets. A lot of children are too scared to go to school. A lot of children then become exposed to crime for the first time when they go to these pupil referral units. And, you know, considering they are children and so by nature are vulnerable, they're more likely to get involved in things like child criminal exploitation. They're more likely to be asked to, you know, hold or carry a weapon or see a weapon for the first time. You know, they're just exposed to a lot more. They might be given drugs after school. There's just so much more that happens. And also, just even if they're not attending the PRU, say they're at home or they're not in school for half the time, I think the national attendance for PRU, the national average is about 50%. You know, some children go from having a 95% attendance to about 40% because they've been permanently excluded. And that's not to say that they didn't meet a threshold or they didn't deserve or, you know, they hadn't met the criteria for that permanent exclusion. It's not to say that. It's to say that the processes afterwards are just simply not good enough. And if we care about all children in the same way and care about their safety, then this article should be taken seriously. And I just think teachers need to step away from, you know, feeling like it's about them. It's not. It's about the children.
But is it fair? Is it fair to put that on teachers, though? Let's say we've got to that situation where the pupil is excluded, child is excluded for whatever reason. Okay, I get the schools have the duty of care. They have the responsibility to the child while they go to that school. But let's say they reach a point where they are excluded. Is it really fair to blame the school for what happens to them when the child no longer goes to the school? I mean,
well,
I agree there could be
blaming
problems,
the school they were excluded from. I'm certainly not. What I'm just saying, I'm not blaming the school that they've been permanently excluded from.
But you are blaming teachers. You are blaming.
No. I just want to finish my point, Tarinder. I just want to respond to Will, please.
You did not include them enough. And if you just included them enough, then quite frankly, they'd have stayed in school, and then they wouldn't be exposed to all this stuff. I'm not disagreeing with you that what happens to them post like that exclusion is good enough, because it's not. It's genuinely not. Whatever with JBL, quite frankly. We do. I've never been in a school genuinely in this country where they've just gone, yeah, just exclude them, just go ahead. Like, let's be quick, let's click our fingers. The first time it happens, let's just go ahead and like just get rid of them. Like, let's just take them out of class. Like, that does not happen. Like, that's just a joke of a comment, quite frankly. And the point that you're trying to make, I think, Yasmin, I think, and it's a fair point, which is that what happens to them later, I do think that we don't think about it enough, but it's not because we're not thinking about it enough beforehand. We are trying our absolute best. You've got to get to your
It's beyond our control. It's beyond our control. We can't. I mean, you can't control everything that goes on in your education.
But what I just want to ask you guys, what I'm just confused by here is, sorry, are the staff?
Sorry, Yasmin, no. Right, you've got to.
What do you mean no?
You cannot keep yourself, your children, and the head teacher cannot keep the staff and the children safe. That's what's got to actually happen. Yeah, whatever, JBL. You know what? Why are you counselling calming down one child? What happens to the other students? Who is teaching them? Yeah, well, fine, I agree, but that's not the point. The point is we have got to reach such a threshold before we even try to exclude a child. And I think what you're seeing, I think what you're thinking and what you're seeing is very different things. Actually go and look at what we have to do in order to actually exclude a child, because we have to prove that we've done pretty much damn near everything, right? You can't just exclude a child from a class or from a school by doing certain things, or by just not helping, or by being a bit annoyed because they disrupted your class on an occasion. That's not what's happening, right? What's happening, you've got to reach absolute threshold. What is that threshold, and why is it happening? So therefore, you've got to look back. What is happening at home? What is happening in wider society? Why are we not helping those children in general? What is going on with the family? What's going on in the family must have like the number one purpose for like that child being excluded in the first place, because ultimately they can't cope with school, because they can't cope with home, they can't cope with life. So we have to put everything we can in place and try and help that child. If they're genuinely going to make everybody unsafe and genuinely going to disrupt everybody's learning, then we've got to put something in place, because ultimately we're not social workers, right? We're not there to like look after children. We're not the family. We're there to teach. But
sometimes we're expected to be. I agree, unfairly often, but you're absolutely right. I think, you know, what leads to a child's behavior being so extreme, they get expelled, it's for a lot of reasons. And quite often, we've all seen it, especially over the pandemic, schools are often expected to do that heavy lifting that, you know, maybe should be or can't be done for whatever reason by social care, or maybe even the police in some cases, or whatever other agencies. For whatever reason, schools are expected to sort of pick it up and do even more than they already do.
Look, I don't even remember what your question was now, Will, that I was like in the middle of
nor do I. I've totally forgotten.
I don't remember. Right. It's okay. I'm happy for that point. I don't remember. But what I did want to, Tarinder, please, just give me a second, please.
Tarinder, because are you being persistently disruptive right now? Are you?
Tarinder, please.
Is this persistently disruptive behaviour? Let's see.
Honestly, I can't even remember what I was going to say, but like I've been listening to Tarinder, and I'm honestly happy for you to finish. However, I did also want to say, like, we can't forget that in pupil referral units, we also have teachers. I think, Will, what you were saying was, is it fair to put this on teachers? And that's not, I don't think that's what's happening here. You know, it's about influencing the wider policies in schools. It's about, you know, changing the outcome for children. That doesn't necessarily need to happen in mainstream, you know, if the children are already excluded. But like, think about, I've been a senior leader in a PRU. You have I feel like unless you've worked in a PRU, you have no idea how much teachers in PRUs deal with every day. They're not any less important. The staff in PRUs are not any less important than the staff.
No, that's what I'm saying. They're really,
and I think what happens
really
a lot is
important.
there's a focus on mainstream over teachers and pupil referral units and alternative provisions and SEMH schools. And yes, you know, these teachers have chosen to work there. And a lot of the time, you know, they have deeply personal and inspiring stories as to how they've ended up there or why they've gone there. But, you know, I think this is something that's ignored a lot of the time, that they also are at risk. You know, when a child is permanently excluded from school for physical assault, what do you think happens when they then, you know, go onto this PRU, and who does it go on to affect? There are still other children there too. And another thing also about PRUs is there are children, like suspensions, again, is another thing that can't be ignored. There are children that have fixed term exclusions who are then, you know, sent to a placement or an alternative provision for a set amount of time where, you know, their school sets them conditions for them to improve before they're able to return. And if they're not able to meet them, then they might go on to a permanent exclusion or a managed move. And again, look, I don't want to sound like I'm maligning schools. I'm a supporter of schools. I'm also a school governor myself, and I have at times even co-signed a decision to permanently exclude a child. I have also sat on the other side where I've advocated for children, where I felt their exclusion wasn't a school having actually exhausted all options and tried their best, which I believe exclusion guidance recommends, but I see Tarinder smirking, and it's like
it's just I'm smirking because I've just seen Tom Rogers like throw another grenade into the situation.
I think he thought it was too civil for a second there. He wants to
actually rock up this time.
Oh look, there he is on the screen. Could they be excluded from cruise for assault? Well, look, I think this topic of exclusions is such a contentious one because there are so many threads in one, and you could just talk about one little, do you know what I mean? I feel like all of the things that we're saying are true in different ways. That makes sense,
Well, and can I say something, Yasmin, which is where I will agree with you, which is that yes, they are also teachers in PRUs as well. Secondly, I don't think we have enough of a link up between mainstream and PRUs. So when we have children who go in, right? So I remember a child going into a PRU part-time, but there was no link up between me and the teacher there to say what was actually happening. So if you're making progress, how are you making progress? What is going on there so I can make it happen? Because he still wasn't coping when he came back in, right? So there was no part of me that wanted him to be excluded, wanted him out, wanted him to be anywhere else but my classroom. Do you see what I mean? You've got to understand it from our the strength of feeling we have. Because if you've got 30 kids, you wake up and you think about those 30 kids. You think about what is it that you're going to do with them? How are you going to teach them? What's going to happen? I think sometimes people forget the depth of feeling that you have towards your own class, and why you would not want a child to be excluded ever from that class, and why in the end it may have to happen, and how awful that is. Because unless you understand that, you can't move forward. If you think we're just a bunch of callous people who just go, well, I just want these 30 robots who, and trust me, I'm a strict teacher, so I'd be quite happy with 30 robots, quite frankly, if I could have them. But they don't exist, right? Real people exist in front of you, and you've got to deal with them. And then what they've got to do is they've got to go somewhere else. They genuinely can't cope. But I do think there's not enough back and forth, and there's not enough understanding between the two sectors, because actually if they saw your circumstances, you saw theirs. I would love to have gone as part of my teacher training to an actual PRU, right?
Yeah,
I'd love the people who go to PRUs to come back into a class and teach once in a while, and teach all their teams, so they can see what the other 29 are like. They can actually see what it's like to be there, because so you don't just have this. But I don't think we have the capacity within the system right now, or the understanding that we must go back and forth over and over again, so that we have that own CPD and our own understanding of each other, so that we can actually get somewhere. Because I see our frustrations, Yasmin, as being from the separate side, but at the same time, we're not going back and forth. Do you see what I mean? If you're not coming back to me, I'm not going back to you. What do we see? We just see our own.
But Tarinder, that's the point I was making at the start when I said that, when I was talking at the start about how children are often forgotten when they go to these places, or when they've been excluded, whether it's fixed term or permanent. That's what I meant as well. So it's not just the teacher, it's also the child that loses this connection. And, the way that I do believe in the, permanent exclusion to prison pipeline. And I think at the start, I feel like you're maligning parents. You mentioned fatherless households. I find that really odd. And I also think it's quite audacious.
You're wrong about that.
It's audacious to say, woe is me, why are these articles maligning teachers? And then you go and malign families that are trying their best. A lot of parents do not deserve what happens to them.
And why are they, what is happening in school? I'm sorry. It's not schools that are causing these exclusions. They are not.
And it's not necessarily parents.
You can't argue
it's not necessarily parents. So you can't. I just think it's very
audacious. Sorry. You can absolutely
say that articles are maligning teachers, and then you go and malign parents. And also to respond to JBL.
Yasmin, if
respond
you're
to
from a
JBL
fatherless family,
and what
no,
you've
if
been
you're from a
saying
fatherless
is,
family, if you're from a fatherless family,
JBL,
you're
I
way
can't
more
hear
likely to go to
myself.
prison. No,
Tarinder,
sorry, if you're from a fatherless family, you're way more likely to go to prison, right? If you as a father cannot be bothered to look after your children, then this is what happens, right? This is literally where we're going with this as a society. But it's happened over and over and over again. There is causation there. There's only correlation between what we do in schools and what goes on later on, right? You
don't
cannot
malign
say
families.
if we just kept
Do
in
not
schools,
malign
that'd be
families
fine.
and parenting.
No, sorry, I'm
It's
not
true.
maligning families.
It
I'm
is
saying
true
this is
that
how
parenting plays
sorry,
a huge
we've been told.
factor
Sorry, we've been told in the
in a
second
child's
hour, we'll move on.
experience, but do not malign families. I just
No,
think
no,
that's
sorry,
I
you're
think
saying
that's
don't malign
unacceptable.
families, don't malign schools and teachers then, Yasmin.
Well,
'Cause
that's what I'm saying to you.
you
It's just audacious that you don't want articles maligning teachers, but then you will, you will then go malign parents.
I will turn around and say that if fathers do not look after their children and they are more likely to go
What
to
if
prison
they're
as a
dead?
result of that.
Like,
sorry, that's not what's happening. That is not. It's not children whose
Sorry, do
whose
you know every
fathers
child? Do you know
are
every
not more
family
likely
in the
to go to
country?
prison,
Do you?
are they? Yasmin, you know as well as I do. If their fathers died, their children are not more likely to go to prison. They're more likely to go to prison if they can't be bothered to actually be present in their lives in the first place. That's what's more likely to happen. So that's just a
No,
rogue
my point
argument.
is, I just don't think you have any
That's a
right
rogue
to be
argument, Yasmin.
commenting
That's a
on
rogue
people.
argument, Yasmin.
Like,
No, I'm
stop
not having it.
making,
I'm not
don't
having
make
it.
someone feel like their relationship failing is why their child got excluded. Like, sorry, I'm from a single parent household.
Sorry.
13
It's all
GCSEs and
our
5
fault, Yasmin.
A-levels.
It's all our fault. Sorry, that's a
Don't
nonsense.
be, it's not, but don't blame parents. Like, you're being
I don't think
really
anyone's putting it all on schools at all. But
Sorry,
I don't want to be boring, but I'm looking at the clock and I'm thinking we're more than halfway there. Can I suggest we move on to the next topic?
Gosh, yep.
Okay.
Sorry, Con. Okay.
A deep breath there.
We've got so just to say that we are being sponsored. Still apparently.
We are being sponsored.
For now. By Kialo Edu, a Better Awarding winning Kialo Edu is the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. Students can instantly and simultaneously create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Don't laugh now, Yasmin. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialoedu.com. John Cat is another one of our sponsors. So this show is brought to you in partnership with John Cat Educational Publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncatbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. So now I'm supposed to introduce the next story. So there was a story. So there was a discussion that me and Carl had a couple of weeks ago over a head teacher. And that head teacher had genuinely been harassed by a particular set of parents, gone to court and got compensation, right? But then this new story came out where these parents So these parents have been detained, and so the police turned up. They've actually got video camera footage of this. They got detained. We are being civil. Come on.
Civil.
So they got detained, and they were released after 5 weeks, right? So they had some WhatsApp messages, and they did send some emails, and it was all related to the idea of that they were not happy about the process of how I think certain people had been promoted or they'd been hired. And so it revolved around that rather than like a decision on behavior or something, you know. And we don't have the full details, I agree. But I just wondered, like, so what can parents do and what can they not do? And I would like to know genuinely, why are parents being arrested just for a WhatsApp group? And
I think it's tricky because I think we all, it's one of those great grey areas that social media, that the internet, smartphones throw up. I think when it comes to posting about your school or your child's school on something like Facebook or making a blog, something very visible, very public that anyone can find, I think most parents would absolutely agree. Schools would definitely say, don't do it. Don't air don't air grievances. Don't sort of name and complain about specific people or whoever. And I think most people would totally agree with that. Of course, on the other hand, you take it out of the public, you move to the private sphere, talking in your own home, whatever. Of course, you can say whatever you want. You can say whatever silly thing you want. People do it. We will do it every single day. But I think a private WhatsApp group chat, and I'm assuming most people with a phone, which is all of us basically, we're all probably part of many of these. And they're semi-private, they're semi-public, they're this weird in-between space, aren't they? And I'm sure we've all seen things in a group chat, not necessarily to do with schools, but a group chat that we felt, oh, I wouldn't say that, or maybe I disagree with it. But I honestly, I don't know what the answer is, because I don't think there are any easy answers with this. I think schools are just going to have to find a way forward, because I would assume we've all got one, right? I would assume if you are a teacher, there will be probably a group WhatsApp chat about your class or your subject or your school, and your name will probably have come up, hopefully for a positive reason. But you know, I mean, in my own experience, you find out about these things if you happen to have a parent who is also a teacher or worker at the school or whatever, who kind of tells you little things on the side. And sometimes it's positive and that's lovely. And then sometimes they tell you something maybe negative that happened, and you sort of think, well, maybe ignorance is bliss. Maybe I can get on without knowing this. But like you were saying earlier, Tarinder, about that case which did come up before, if it moves into actual harassment or really, you know, vile language or threats or whatever it might be, or just lies or whatever, then that seems to cross a line. What I would love to know about this particular article, where these parents were visited by the police, 6 police turned up, which seems like quite a big reaction. I'd like to know what they actually said, because, okay, I've got their quote. In the actual article, they say, quote, "We made a few and we cannot fathom what happened. It doesn't make any sense." This is the parents talking. "We made a few inquiries. We had a bit of banter on a WhatsApp group, and then we were arrested." Now, a bit of banter, that's so vague. We need to know, I think to fairly judge this kind of case, you have to know what is being said. Because I think we'd all agree there is a line that can be crossed. It's not as simple as saying, oh, it's free speech, you can say whatever you want. I think in these kind of semi-public groups, when you're talking about, you know, named individuals, there has to be some kind of responsibility and maybe some repercussions.
Yeah, and this is what I think. Like, I think genuinely, if they've said something that's defamatory, that harm the ability of that head teacher or the people that are trying to lead or teach in that school, to run the school, then fair enough, right? In a serious way. But that's not what it feels like, because they were detained and then the case was dropped. So what made the case happen and what made it drop? And while I don't like the idea of people talking behind my back, clearly we all do. Like, I'm sorry, but it's just one of those realities. People do. It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. Yeah.
Right. And it, like you say, it can be in a positive way, it can be in a negative way. Like you can talk about people the way that you want to, right? But where is the line there? Like, what's the threshold for parents? Because they've got to be able to sometimes say, actually, I'm a bit annoyed about this school, because there are times when schools have not done a good job, and they've got to be able to say, I don't agree with that. Because if they can't, and where do they go then? Because they can't just be in themselves. Because I know, like, I've got friends myself who are parents who genuinely disagree with what the school has done. And they've got to be able to say that to somebody in some situation. You can't just go, right, that's it, you're going to be arrested. And I'm not saying that's what happened, but like you say, Will, we don't know enough about this case. What do you think, Yasmin?
Yeah, I agree. I think we don't know enough. I think my mind goes to, you know, where there are any threats. I think, you know, schools are in a really tough position where they're easy to find. You know, there's a lot of information about them online, including their start times, end times, whatever. You know, they've got to safeguard their entire school community. Like, I can understand why they might have contacted the police without knowing any further details. But I would say what my mind went to was how sometimes, and I agree, parents should be allowed to discuss things. And I think probably in every school there are parents who talk about the things, or, you know, express their dislike. But I think for me, the question is how many of those parents then go and take this up with the school directly or follow the school's procedures, because every school has procedures and they're normally published on their website. But I think a lot of people have learned, especially with the rise of social media and also exacerbated by national media who, you know, constantly malign and put down schools, that actually having a group kind of outrage, you know, a mass outrage aimed at a school or a particular teacher can get you what you want faster, because, you know, schools have to think about the safety of their whole community. They have to think about, you know, to a lesser extent, but their reputation and a lot of other things. And so for me, I just sometimes think, even though it's really hard to figure out people's intentions, like I just think for me, if people have said things in a WhatsApp group chat, but they've also taken it up with the school, is very different.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I just think for me, the
Exactly.
question is, did they follow the school procedures?
I
Did
think
they
exactly.
take this up with the school? Were the school aware of it? You know, was anyone threatened? Because I've even got a friend who refused to, a really close friend of mine, refused to move a pupil in her class. This child then escalated it, you know, parents complained, teacher, you know, my friend, you know, stood her ground. And then she got a referral to the TRA. And how she found out was she got an email from them saying you've been referred by a member of the public, and which, you know, informing you that we're not taking any further action. And I just thought, what the hell, you know?
Yeah.
So I think for me, you know, I also am aware of a school that once started a petition against a teacher in a debate about creationism versus Big Bang. And, you know, it offended some children. And the petition was actually about the fact that he's an atheist, which had nothing to do with the lesson, but it was information that, you know, that was just otherwise known about this teacher. And again, that was someone that was my friend. And so for me, and I know, you know, off the back of that, what happened and the danger that this teacher felt that they were in. So I just think, you know, I love the idea of parents talking about schools, and I think they do this every day, whether they're coming to collect their children and have a chat in the playground or whether it's over WhatsApp. But I do also think that it's worth considering there is a massive increase in the people who will take it to social media or to other people before they take it to a school. And I think that's really bad for schools. And actually, I'm kind of in support of anything that will kind of support the well-being of staff in school to protect them from that.
Totally. I mean, I think a really good home school relationship, it doesn't look like everyone's happy with everything all the time, because that will never happen. That's totally unrealistic. Schools have to be prepared for a bit of pushback. Like you say, you talk about people complaining about a policy or something. That seems to me totally fair enough. But I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I think a happy relationship or good relationship between home and school should look like parents feeling like they are able to come to the school and communicate. If they genuinely have a serious problem with something the school is doing, to be able to communicate with the school and be heard by them. I think if you just a little moan here and there on a WhatsApp group, if it's just blowing off steam and it's not really consequential, I think everyone thinks that's fine. But if you're constantly complaining, especially when, like you've mentioned a couple of examples, when it's directed at one person and for quite personal things about that person that are really relevant to them being a teacher as such, that seems to cross the line. When that parent doesn't seem interested in fixing the problem, they're not talking to the school about it, they seem interested in just, well, kind of what was it's like lighting a match and starting a fire. You've lost control of it. And if you're constantly making someone into a bit of a hate figure online, I hope that's not putting it too strongly, but I think in some cases that is kind of what happens. It's not good intentions, is it? You know,
no, totally. I feel like my mind goes back to, I don't know if you guys saw this, and I think I mentioned it on a previous show, but it was with Carl and David. But I don't know if you remember, it was widespread on the internet either last year or the year before, but it was a TRA referral of a teacher with a glue gun in a primary school in Enfield. It was a glue gun incident where a child got burned.
What a monster. Get them out of the class.
But I remember, I just remember when I saw that on Twitter, a teacher had posted it, and, you know, I read it. There was a lot of discussion about it at the time. And one of the things that really stood out to me was, I think someone tagged the parent's account, Twitter account, in the thread. And I remember clicking on it thinking, you know, I wonder if there's anything on their page about this, you know, reflecting on this. And actually, it was, from what I remember, a Twitter page that had only been created immediately after the incident. And there were only a few tweets, and they were all aimed at trying to, you know, get a lot of public attention aimed at this teacher, you know, to essentially get them cancelled. And you know, I just remember seeing that it didn't catch on. It didn't. But obviously, this is something that went to the TRA, and then everyone found out about it anyway, years later or whatever. But I just remember thinking, I think it's worth considering the precedent that the media set for parents. I think like I was saying earlier, if you go, I don't want to like go around in circles, but if you go through school policies and procedures, there is no school that will turn you away. And, like you said, Will, schools will accept that, there will sometimes be pushback. There will be people that aren't happy. If you've got a massive school with loads of people, it's hardly likely that everyone's going to always be on board with every decision you make all the time. But, I think it's just worth thinking about what the media contribute to, this. I think cancel culture affects schools a lot. Essentially, that's what I was trying to say.
So I think part of my issue with this whole situation is I don't like I said, we don't have enough information. It may be the school tried everything. They tried to bring them in. They tried to talk to them. It may very well be that, or it may be they reacted too quickly to this now, and therefore went straight to the police and just went, we're not having anything to do with it. So the difference would be between a school saying, we are going to bring them in, we will try our best, regardless of whether they're unhappy with us or not, to speak to these parents and see what's going on. There's got to be a real difference between that and a school that just goes, right, that's it, like we've had enough. But equally, I can understand frustration. And I equally had a conversation, I think it was only last week or maybe the week before, where I was saying that actually we need some media regulation. Like we do need some actual media regulation, like not on the parents necessarily, but on like newspapers, on like social media, where they cannot turn around and just attack a school. Because every September we know what happens, right? Every September what happens is schools have rules, by the way, shock horror. And therefore we have these stories every single September. My child just wasn't following. My child's got his haircut. What do you want them to do? Right. Well, you know what? You knew what the policy was, so why are you sending them in with that? Oh, but they want these kind of shoes. Yeah, but the school has got like the ability to help you. So again, I've not worked in a single school where they've not helped out in terms of uniform, in terms of money, in terms of whatever. Right. I've not worked in a single one that won't do it. And have asked parents for things they genuinely cannot do or cannot provide without somehow providing it themselves if the child if the family genuinely can't, right? So we don't need that. But what we don't need is a situation where parents can't say anything about us, because they have to be able to say something about us. Because if we're genuinely getting it wrong, they've got to have some outlet somewhere. Right, because you've got to say that about every single person, right? You can't say that parents aren't allowed to go on WhatsApp and even if they're beefing about us, even if it's minor and like we never even hear about it ever again, fine. Maybe they've had a bad day and they're just saying things, because sometimes we all have bad days and we say things, right? And then we may regret them, we may turn back on them and say, look, I was wrong about that, right? You've got to have, like, they're still human beings and they've still got to have something, but at the same time, where is that threshold? Because I feel like the relationship between parents and schools has been disrupted in a way that I've never known before, right? Like, and I think lockdown did not help whatsoever. I think it was already being disrupted. I think it's been made worse as a result of that. But it's certainly not, there's certainly not the understanding that like my mum had with my teacher. I don't feel it. I don't feel that we have that. Right?
Well, that relationship is so key. Sorry, as I say, that relationship, that trust is so key. I mean, I'm sure we're not omniscient. We do make mistakes. I'm sure we've all had lots of examples where a parent or someone has spoken to us maybe about something we didn't know or something we didn't realize, a problem. And I'm really glad they did. And, I was able to improve and be better as a result. So we do want that information to come our way, even if it may not be what we want to hear. It's probably good for us to hear it in some cases. Again, if it's constructive, we're talking about communicating with the school. But I think one reason why this gets us as teachers why it's such an important issue for us is our whole profession is about trust. We are every single day, we're saying to parents, look, here is the deal. You are going to entrust us with your children, with their safety, their well-being, and their education. And there's something, and trust is very, very hard to earn, and it's incredibly easy to lose. And just the rumor mill, just a WhatsApp group chat, like, if you had to design something that was perfect, a private WhatsApp group chat, if you had to design something that was going to destroy someone's credibility without them even realizing, it's perfect for that. And I think that's why it scares us so much, because if we lose that trust in the eyes of our, our parents, our guardians, then how can we really be educators? I mean, it's so corrosive, and that's why I think it's so dangerous.
I remember a colleague of mine who used to sit in the staff room and just go, "Where's the common sense? Where is it? Where has it gone?" Like genuinely, he's just sat there with just his arms up, like going, "So where is it? Where's the common sense?" And I think there is an element that common sense has gone out the window, and it's really made it hard for us. Look, at the end of the day, no matter how much you love your children, your immediate family, the children, I don't have children myself, but I got my niece. Like, look, I know she's going to lie at some point. She is. She's going to lie. She's going to do something naughty at school. Something will happen, because that's what children do, right? I always say year 4 are the liars, right? They are.
I've got a year 4 class right now. So.
Right, yeah. So they will lie.
No comment.
I don't understand, Yasmin, how it works, right? So they try their best in year 1. They can't get away with it. They've just not got the capacity. Year 2, they try a bit harder. Still, they just give themselves away. Year 3, on the threshold. Year 4, they come into their own. It's like, yeah, I can lie for real. And you've got to be able to spot it, and you've got to be able to say, no, you've just lied to me. Like, I'm sorry, but every year 4 class I talk the same. And even the best behaved child just tries it on at least once, right? And you love them to bits, but they are what they are. They're going through a process of understanding truth and lying and all the rest of it, and what will people accept, right? And so therefore, got to help them through that process. But the idea that you go, like the idea that any parent thinks my child will never lie, it's just like, are you for real? Like, do you not understand children whatsoever? Have you not been around them? Like, come on, like, and so part of our problem is that sometimes we have these parents who think my child will never lie to me. They've deluded themselves in a way that, like, other parents, like in the past, would never have deluded themselves. Like, my mum knew if I had not been telling the truth. Like, she just got it like that, right? She just knew. She was like, no, you're not telling the truth now. Come on, it's not the end of the world that you're not telling the truth. Whereas they think it's the end of the world, their child's world, if you turn around to them and say certain things. And it's like, no, it's part of their growing up process, and you've got to, like, be part of that. And I think that's eroded a heck of a lot of trust between parents and teachers, just by them just saying, okay, well, all we really need from parents is that them going, okay, can we just listen to another side of the story, as opposed to I must defend my child to all costs, right? And don't get me wrong, my mum felt like that too, but she had that understanding of, like, well, you may not be 100% telling me everything, so I'm going to go and find out before anything happens, right? But that's gone now. It's just like, let's kick off straight away.
Yeah.
And I think
sort of break. Sorry.
No, you go.
No, I was just going to say, I think there can be that wider. I don't know, all be doom and gloom, because I've worked in schools with, like, brilliant relationships with people at home. Not always perfect. There are problems, like there isn't any big place with hundreds of people coming and going every day, but the problems get sorted. There's a sort of channel to work it out. But when you're talking about Tarinder, it's that lack of, it's trust, isn't it? Basically, right? It's this basic trust that if the teacher calls me at the end of the day, as a parent, I can go one or two ways. I can go, oh, it's us, my family, versus them, the school, who are kind of coming at me, who are not going to tell the truth, and I'm going to trust my child more, no matter what it is. Or you can have some trust in the adults. It's, like we said, that's so key to everything. And if you trust your child's teachers, you'll listen to them when they come at you with something that you might not want to hear, but it's fundamentally for the good of your child for you to listen to.
But I wonder if we don't have, and I think maybe it's time, and I think it's to do with workload. I think there's other issues going on here, right? Do we have as much time for the parents as we used to? Like, I do wonder that sometimes. I remember, like, and this is like a really weird story, but okay, so we had a robbery in my home, but the only reason why we had it is because my mum was actually at school. So she was a part of a group at school at that point in time. So, like, I know that awful thing happened, it doesn't matter, right? But the point was that she was at school because my head teacher used to make time for, like, for a group of parents to come in and talk to her, right? And these were the parents that were, like, supported the school in the first place, right? So sometimes all we hear is parents who don't support us. We never hear the parents who do support us, right? So she used to make time for them as well. And so they were in school, and they were having their discussion. It was weekly. And so it was fine. Like, And so I only mentioned the two things because it happened at the same time, and so she was fine. But it was just just my own memory. It was like, but I remember that, right? I remember suggesting the similar thing later on, and the head teacher just went, "No, why would we do that?" Like in a particular school that I was in, it was like, "Why would we do that?" Well, you do that so that you build those relationships, you build that trust, you build that, you know, that swell up towards you, right? So when do the parents who support you or support us ever get to meet us? Like, when do we actually talk to them? Like, do we have enough meetings? So, for example, can we do things like just have meetings at the beginning of the year with the parents? I remember having one in one particular school, and it was great. Had a meeting with them right at the beginning of the year, you know, in the first week back, just saying, like, setting up my stall to some extent, and just saying, look, this is my classroom, this is what I do. This is where things are. This is how I'm going to treat your children. This is why I'm going to do things in a certain way. This is why my routines are the way they are. And do you know what? It made life so much easier. It just made life so much easier. And I know it takes time, but can we not make that time in the first place? So we can, because I think we've got to do something here. We can't just go into this negative spiral of poor parental relations with school, because I feel like that's what we're having right now. It's just a negative spiral. We're just going down and down and down. And actually, we need to come back up somehow.
I think we do that if we take the longer term view and we say, okay, it's an investment of time at the beginning of the year. And what you're talking about, Tarinder, is, I think, a really good idea. I've done something very similar in schools I've worked at before. It's an investment of time now, but it will save you time in the long run, because it will prevent lots of, you know, conversations that maybe don't need to happen if I can just be clear about who I am at the beginning.
Sorry to cut you off, but the other thing that we need to do is to, like, make sure that we have that, like, we transfer that relationship between primary and secondary, and we don't do that enough, right? We don't do that enough. We don't talk enough between ourselves. Like sometimes it's like, look, okay, so I'm part of a multi-academy trust, so therefore we do have relationships with our secondaries, and we can talk to them about it, right? But regardless of whether you are part of a mass or not, surely there's got to be more links between us, like in primary, and them in secondary, and then therefore we talk about it, as opposed to it being a cut-off point, which it is right now for many people, right? It's a cut-off point between primary and secondary, and then the parents have got to restart again. And I wonder if some of the frustration does not come from the fact that I've got to restart again now. I've got to restart all of this, as opposed to it being like a transference of, like, your child from one place to another, and therefore, you know, you've got the same understanding. And I know people will ask, where will the time come from? But if you want the time, you'll make the time. If you genuinely care about the child, you'll make the time and you'll make it happen. Because the way I always see it with, like, the children that I've taught is, I didn't teach them for no reason. You know, I wanted them to do, but, like, you know, I want, like, my year fours, for all that I say that, like, jokingly about,
for as much as they're a bunch of liars.
Why do they do that, right? And I don't want them to go and fail in secondary. That's not what I wanted, right? And I don't want it to be the case that if their parents then have, or if they're slightly struggling in primary and they struggle even more in secondary, that, like, I don't want them to not get the help. It's just, how do we do this? And I know that it takes time, but I think, like you say, we've got to think about long term here for the children. I think too often we think too short term when it comes to education, and not long term enough. And I don't think it helps, like, politics and all the rest of it, because they themselves are short term. But I think we don't think long term enough, and we don't think enough, like, where do you want this to go? Like, where do you want it to go?
Yeah. And I think, actually, to link that to the previous topic we discussed as well, I remember seeing not long ago a graph where the year with the biggest jump in, like, suspensions and exclusions was from year 6 to year 7. And I think, you know, having a child going from managing the expectations of one you know, teacher in a classroom to having very many across subjects, I think, you know, I completely agree with you, Tarinder. I think, you know, to build that relationship with parents and families and children from the transition from, you know, year 6 into secondary school would actually have benefits beyond, you know, just the wider well-being of everybody, but also, you know, their long-term prospects in school.
There's all the innovations to happen, right? And I have to say, I was kind of slightly skeptical before I saw it. I saw a slightly, like, primary setup in a secondary school, and it wasn't like the entire time, right? But it was just like those year 7s that they thought might be excluded, might struggle basically with coping with secondary. And we do know who they are, Will. Like, if you're a primary, you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, you know exactly who those kids are who you think they're not going to cope in secondary, right? And we already know it, right? What they did was they gave them at least half a day where they were in the same classroom with the same teacher, and they still had to go to some subjects and start to cope with other teachers, but they did have like that stability for that half a day, right? And so then they taught them maths, English, history, geography, and like I said, I was slightly skeptical of it, but then when I saw the children myself, I thought, actually, that's a solution to a problem that we already know that we have. And yes, maybe we need to research it more. Maybe we need to like look at it and go, okay, so what has happened over time? Because if those children have not been excluded in year 7 and they move on into year 8 and year 9 and they can cope, then that must be something we should roll out more. We've got to think more widely about this. But anyway, I think we've hit our hour-long limit. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for coming, Will and Yasmin, to the show and contributing. And we'll see you next week.
Outstanding and world-class vision, world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.